Welcome to the new episode of Cine-cool Reviews. As you can see, I'm walking along trying to find a new place to live. Not having much luck. Seems like a nice enough neighborhood, but nothing seems to be for sale. But as I'm strolling along, I feel a little creepy, just shopping around like this. I almost feel like I'm stalking the streets of suburbia, much like The Shape, Michael Myers, in John Carpenter's Halloween. I suppose this should, lead into like a review or something, right? So, well, no, I guess John Carpenter's Halloween has been reviewed enough that I really shouldn't touch it. I mean, it's probably, most famously known to be reviewed by Roger Ebert, who said he compared it to Psycho. But personally, if I were going to be comparing it to any Hitchcock film, I'd probably be comparing it to Shadow of a Doubt. You see, there are strong similarities between the two. They're really both about the invasion of the supposedly safe suburbia, which separated itself from, the dangerous urban streets, and, where they all found their blue heaven, so to speak. And suddenly, hey, look, evil exists in suburbia too. Your safe community is not as safe as you thought. However, there are the obvious influences from Psycho, which many people consider to be the first slasher film, or at least the first proto-slasher film. So, Halloween did come out in 1978, back when, you had largely exploitation films taking up the horror genre. There were the occasional films like The Exorcist, which were a bit classier, but really, ever since Psycho, there was this struggle, because Psycho emulated the exploitation film itself, while obviously being above it in quality. And so, when films such as Night of the Living Dead came along, which took a more real-world approach like Psycho did, but applied it to something more fantastical, like the ghoul or the zombie, it really threw things off, because, people sort of, in earlier years, had associated horror with sort of the Universal horror films and the Hammer horror films, which were pure fantasy. Psycho shifted where there was a possibility of, the psychotic person in the real world that we can really associate with, and so there was this attempt to reconcile it. You had films like Last House on the Left and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which were very much in the vein of Psycho with real-world killers, and then you had films like Night of the Living Dead and The Exorcist, which had real-world settings but the supernatural within. What Carpenter's film really did is it was the complete, perfect reconciliation of the two, because The Shape, Michael Myers, is not completely in one camp or the other. He could very well be your psychotic killer that we have been getting from all of these murder mystery films, like the giallo films in Italy, or Play Misty for Me, or Black Christmas in the 1970s. Or alternatively, he could be the ghost, the ghoul, something haunting this town, because he is very much an embodiment of an urban legend. He is the memory that the town has tried to repress of this horrible event in the past. He is the haunted house. He is the escaped maniac of the old urban legends. So he is neither completely human, nor is he completely inhuman. He's somewhere straight down the middle. He is neither distinctly a real villain, nor is he distinctly a supernatural villain. It's all up to interpretation, because he is more a metaphor than anything. And that is what makes Halloween so much better than the decade plus of imitators that came after it. The movies that immediately imitated, Friday the 13th, Prom Night, My Bloody Valentine, they never quite found the same balance of reality and unreality, and so they lacked that manipulation of the audience and the frustration they put on the audience. Even the sequels to Halloween were never able to achieve that. Amazingly enough, not even the first sequel, Rick Rosenthal's Halloween 2 from 1981, which was written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, just like the first one, but was directed by Rick Rosenthal and was, shot. It was still shot by Dean Cundey with still gorgeous cinematography, although not quite as good as the original. But it was shot for a much larger budget and was done through Universal as opposed to independently, although, Mustafa Akkad was still attached, of course, despite what the recent Blu-ray release would have you to believe. And that's not to say that Halloween 2 has nothing going for it. I mean, it very impressively explores the reaction of the small town to this discovery that they are not as safe as they thought. And they take on this almost primitive personality as a town where they feel the need to destroy the Myers house, and they feel the need to show that they will not be defied by this evil force within them. And the movie, once again, does raise that question of how natural and how supernatural this is. How much of this is magic and how much of this is psychological. And ultimately, a line said by Donald Pleasance, Dr. Loomis, near the end of Halloween 2, addresses the question in a way that I think is most satisfying. He says that Samhain, the spirit of Halloween, ties back to Druid faith, at least in the modern day, is not about witches and magic. It's about the unconscious mind. So even if there is this seemingly supernatural element to the Shape, who in the first film was played mostly by Nick Castle, and in the second film was mostly played by stuntman Dick Warlock, that ultimately the movie is exploring a psychological phenomenon, even if it presents it in a more abstract or metaphorical way. So the killer Michael Myers between both films is not so much a flesh and blood killer. He is not so much a ghost or phantom. He is something distinctly in the middle, crossing those boundaries. He can be Dracula or the Frankenstein monster one moment, or he can be Ed Gein or Charles Manson the next. And that's what makes him such an effective and frightening killer. And even if Halloween 2 is an inferior film to the first, they both have that in common, which makes them two very strong and memorable films. The original as a great 1970s horror film, in fact, a great 1970s film, and the sequel as one of the better films of the golden age of slashers in the early 1980s, while still vastly inferior to the first. But that does raise the question of what can we learn from these films? Well, considering that, Michael Myers as a young boy spent his whole time staring at the wall, being passive, being lethargic, and we see Laurie Strode, the protagonist of the two films, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, spending her whole time staring out the window, seemingly, detached from everyone but her closest friends and her family, being sort of a social outcast for, as she says, being too smart. Maybe we should be underestimating those repressed people that we see, the untalkative ones, because, hey, some of them might be the psychotic killers willing to snap at the right moment, just waiting and biding their time, and others might be the intelligent, capable people that we don't give them credit for being. Either way, Don't underestimate that repressed person sitting beside you. You don't know what he or she may be.